Hello and welcome to episode 13 of On the Cube Leadership Podcast. Well, we've got a special one for you today. Normally, we look at things that are happening in pop culture, in politics, in business, in ministry, and in the Bible to learn how we can be better leaders. However, there's a slight change today because, well, everything we seem to be watching, everything we seem to be seeing right now, all seems to be talking about crypto. That's right. No. Before you log off, we're not going to be selling you any crypto. We're not even promoting any crypto. We're not even actually really talking about crypto itself, although we will. What we're going to do is we're going to be doing a crypto-themed episode where we're actually looking at some of the leadership decisions from the outside perspective. Obviously, we are not experts and we don't know about these situations, but what we can learn metaphorically from some of these things that we can learn to be better leaders. So today's going to be a bit of we're going to look at crypto, we're going to look at NFTs, we're going to look at the metaverse, as well as we are going to look at the Bible to see how we can be better leaders. So joined with me, as always, is Dr. Rod St. Hill. How are you this week, Dr. Rod St. Hill?
I'm going really well, thank you. I've just had a little holiday, so who wouldn't be going well after a little holiday in the sunshine?
Yes, of course. You definitely look like you've got a little bit of a healthy glow. So glad for that break. I'm looking forward to mine in a couple of weeks. So, but Dr. Rod, we're not just going to be joined by Dr. Rod. We have something extra special. We have two extra people, not two extra. We've got one extra. It's me and two others, right? That's what I'm saying. Me and two others. So it's not only Dr. Rod that we're going to be hearing from. I thought today, why not bring on someone that is also one of our board members, a director of our organization, an advisor to me, someone who actually encourages and supports me, one of our coaches in OnPurposeCUBED, which is our leadership development program. If you haven't heard about it, you should check out the link below. So she's one of our coaches as well as she is she is my psychologist as well, because she keeps this thing straight as I'm leading others. She makes sure that I'm leading from a place of sanity. Let me introduce you to Erin Carmody. Erin, welcome.
Hey, Craig, and hey, Dr. Rod, and hey, everybody else who's tuning in to listen. It's great to be here today, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the conversation. I think it's going to be pretty interesting content today.
So, obviously, because you're here. So you're probably wondering, well, what has a psychologist got to do with crypto? Well, we actually want to take, obviously, we want to be looking at crypto and NFTs and the metaverse and all those sorts of things. We want to kind of look at those things because lately, now, remember, we pre-record this content. So this is probably going to be coming out about a month or two after all of this stuff has happened. And so there's probably been lots and lots of updates. However, right now, there is something that seems to have overtaken our radio waves, so to speak, over the last few months, is all these crypto crashes. And there's so many different organizations that are crashing or causing effect and impacting. So we thought, let's get on and talk about this from a leadership perspective, because none of us want our organizations to be collapsing like these, and see what lessons we can learn. And it'd be great to be able to understand that from a psychological standpoint as to some of the decisions we make, etc. However, Erin is actually also a bit of what do you call it? A recreational crypto investor? Is that the right term, Erin?
Crypto is an interesting space. I don't know that anybody would present themselves as like an expert professional cryptocurrency, person. So everyone's kind of doing it recreationally, I'd almost say. But I'm a crypto enthusiast. I'm an investor. I hold some cryptocurrencies, none of which I will name because obviously we're not promoting any at the moment, particularly during the current circumstances. But yes, that's how I've described myself.
Great. And so I thought, like, if we're going to talk about crypto, why not bring her on, because she's probably more knowledgeable than the rest of us. I'm just reading headlines and seeing what's happening. Now, before we get into this, I'm going to start out the way. Obviously, Dr. Rod always says, Craig, you always ask the tough question. I'm going to ask a tough question, Erin. What is crypto?
That's an amazing question. So crypto is basically a cryptographically secured method of exchange. So basically, cryptocurrencies are like, you can think of them as the native currencies of the internet. Okay, so a lot of sovereign countries obviously have their own currencies. The most dominant one is obviously the US dollar. And then in much of a similar fashion, there are currencies that are like inherent to the internet and based around the online world. And so there's actually thousands of them at this point, but in much the same way as the US dollar is the dominant sovereign currency, Bitcoin is the dominant cryptocurrency at this moment in time. So you can use them to transmit value peer-to-peer without the use of a bank, without the intervention of a government, from anywhere in the world, across borders, across oceans, generally instantaneously for low amounts of money, and that's their sort of major use case at the moment.
And so, excuse my stupidity, but I understand that there's kind of two different types of crypto. One is pretty much just a store of value. It's like putting money into a bank account. And then the other is like kind of investing in programs, or they're creating software that is actually creating value and for a particular purpose. So almost like investing into a digital business or something like. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a pretty good delineation. So Bitcoin would be your sort of standard store of value. So a lot of people refer to it as digital gold, for example. I'm not sure I agree with that, but that's kind of the way the narrative around it and the way it's thought about. And then you have something like Ethereum, which is more about an application layer for the blockchain. And so then people build on top of Ethereum things that are called dApps, or decentralized apps. And these have sort of various use cases, from DeFi, decentralized finance, to NFTs, which you've probably heard a lot about, and a whole myriad of wild and wonderful kind of experiments that are going on in that space as well.
I'm sure we're going to get into more detail about these things as we get into the story, but I just kind of wanted to lay foundations. Dr. Rod, I just wanted to pass to you as an economist. Obviously, currencies is something that you're aware of. How do, as in a general term, how do cryptocurrencies affect, obviously, your area of understanding economics?
Well, that's a good question. And really, it's an unfolding story. As Erin mentioned, the cryptocurrencies, they are a kind of money. They are acceptable in terms of satisfying exchange transactions peer-to-peer. And in that sense, they're like any other type of money, because one of the fundamental functions of money is to actually enable people to exchange things of value. In addition to that, for many people, the cryptocurrencies are seen as an investment, and that's not really one of the functions of money. So in a real sense, they've got a dual purpose. And one of the functions of money is to act as a store of value. Now, in times of high inflation, normal currencies are not a good store of value, because they're losing value fairly quickly if you hold on to them. With cryptocurrencies, of course, we've seen that they are quite volatile, and so you can make significant gains in value, significant losses in value. So in that sense, cryptocurrencies are probably not good money, and economists argue all the time as to whether or not we should regard them as money. Central banks have been relatively slow in taking up cryptocurrencies, and I think that there is a technical reason for that. Erin mentioned, of course, that you can engage in peer-to-peer transactions, and so you don't need banks, and importantly, you don't need governments. So cryptocurrencies actually exist outside the whole, what we call the system of exchange, the whole payments system. And that can be a problem when it comes to certain applications of macroeconomic policy. And I suspect one of the reasons why central banks have been relatively slow in taking up cryptocurrencies is that in doing so, they could well lose control of national monetary policy. And that is something that economists would be worried about. Tax departments also, of course, see cryptocurrencies as a form of investment. And so in the context of Australia, of course, if you sell cryptocurrency, that may trigger a capital gains tax. So they're fairly complicated. They're interesting from an economic point of view. But also it's important to recognize they're really just an application of technology, the blockchain technology, which I won't really go into in great detail, but it's been used for many, many purposes, including marketing. And I'm fascinated to see how blockchain technologies are now being used in marketing of agricultural produce. So, for example, you can go and buy a high-end knitted, what we call a jumper here in Australia. Some other countries call them pullovers or use other terms. But you can buy a particular woolen product and you can actually trace it all the way back to even the individual sheep whose fleece contributed to that product. And that's opening up a new world of marketing as well. So although some people are critical of cryptocurrencies, and maybe there is some reason to be, that underlying technology is a really powerful technology that is seeing applications in many, many different areas. And it's really exciting.
That's good. That's good. Now, before we get started, disclaimer, obviously this is not financial advice. Don't take any advice. We're not telling you what to invest. We're sharing leadership principles, right? But also, as a little bit of a general advice, don't ever invest anything that you can't afford to lose, right? I think that's my bit of advice overarching as we're talking about investments. Don't ever go into an investment thinking, risking an amount of money that you can't afford to lose. Any form of investment is a gamble. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if you don't understand what it is, and as we've seen recently, if there is a yield being promised and you don't understand where that yield is coming from, you probably are the yield. So,
which we'll get to. You're probably wondering, what does that mean? We'll actually get to that in a moment. Okay, so let's actually get into, Erin, you spoke about just before that there's there's obviously the currencies, the cryptocurrencies, but then there's also dApps, I think you called that, like dApps. Let's get into a supposed dApp that has actually rocked the crypto world and is like, making all the news right now, is the collapse of FTX. FTX, as far as I'm aware, was an exchange. So it's kind of a bank account. It's kind of like a bank without being a bank. Is that right?
Well, it really shouldn't be like that. That's a lot of the problem of what actually occurred with it. So I guess just to sort of understand what an exchange is, it's sort of very simply exactly what it sounds like. So an exchange, a cryptocurrency exchange, is where you go and exchange your sovereign currency dollars, so whether that's Australian dollars or US dollars, for a particular cryptocurrency. Now, a big part of the problem with FTX is that they actually also offered custody of these cryptocurrencies. Okay, so people could effectively leave their cryptocurrencies on that exchange. And
so what you're saying is, does that normally happen with a traditional exchange? Can people leave their money in there? Okay.
And this has been sort of a problem over and over again in cryptocurrency. We've seen exchanges collapse several times. Several large exchanges have collapsed in the past.
What about non-crypto exchanges? Can you keep your,
So
or is this only unique to crypto exchanges that you can store your money there?
yeah, so there's two ways you can store your cryptocurrency. One would be on an exchange, which I would never suggest as a place to store your cryptocurrencies because they are in effect operating like an unregulated bank at this point in time. And as we go through the FTX stuff, we'll see sort of what's been able to happen because these exchanges have been custodying the cryptocurrencies. What should be people's first principle when they come into cryptocurrency is the principle of self-custody. So that is, you have your own wallet, which you could load up onto any device. You could use a phone, you could use a laptop, or what's called a hardware wallet, which is a very secure form of a cryptocurrency wallet. It's sort of disconnected from the internet and very difficult to hack. And if your funds were stored on your own wallet, and if you were self-custodying that cryptocurrency, this could never have occurred, essentially. So that the fact that it is operating kind of like an unregulated bank is the crux of the problem, I would say, with what's occurred here.
So let's give the story. So there's an exchange worth the organization was worth $32 billion, run by a gentleman called Sam Bankman-Fried, right? Like,
yeah.
If the name didn't give it away at the start, Bankman-Fried, really? So they've collapsed, and there's a lot of controversy around it. He was touted as being like the most generous billionaire because he was known for just giving money away and all that sort of stuff. Living in the Bahamas with his core business partners, but also they were polyamorous. Polyamorous. I always get my tongue tied around that. In relationship, it was just, and then there was another organization called Alameda that was meant to be a separate organization, but there was funds shared between them and so. So there's from the outside. Now I actually saw that he got in. I saw today that he got interviewed, and there's obviously there's a justification to everything. He responded to everything, but who knows? By the time you watch this, it'll probably all come out. Who knows? But at this stage, it all just sounds messy. And then this organization crashed, and everyone lost their money, or what's happened with it?
Yes, there are currently something like $10 billion of customer funds gone. Potentially the largest financial crime that we know of in history. So a gentleman by the name of John J. Ray III has become the executive of FTX as they go through bankruptcy proceedings. Now, he was, I believe, quite instrumental in overseeing the Enron bankruptcy proceedings. He has labelled the FTX situation worse than Enron, the worst financial situation he's seen in his career. And just a few of the flags he's kind of on record talking about is, okay, so this company, FTX, was worth $32 billion. They had no accountant. They had never had a board meeting. There were 600 employees on the books, most of whom were fake. Customer funds were used to purchase over $1 billion worth of property in Sam Bankman-Fried's name. But customer funds were used without the knowledge of the customers to trade in their trading arm known as Alameda Finance. And obviously, as they started losing trades, they just kept taking more and more funds until it got to the point where
Hang on a second, Erin. No. That was just an accounting. That was a mislabeled account, wasn't it? That's what his response is. No, that was a mislabeled account. We forgot that account was owed to FTX customers.
Yeah, mislabeled account. There's quite a few expletives that I could say in response to that. I will hold back. So I guess this isn't just me saying it. This is sort of a professional in the industry, the current CEO of FTX, someone who was majorly involved in Enron, calling this possibly the worst financial disaster that's ever occurred. And I think he called it a complete failure of corporate governance. There were just no safeguards in place, a string of shell companies across the Bahamas, pretty much like everything that could go wrong went wrong. And so it was really in my view.
To play devil's advocate for a moment.
Yeah.
Obviously, this whole space is new, right? There's just it's new people. Like, this person had no experience, none of his team. They're all just coders. They're all just like it's a new generation. They have no experience in governance and all that sort of stuff. Is this just not saying is it justified? Is there a place for this whole just run fast and break stuff and just figure it out along the way? Yeah, because, to bring this back into leadership, there's a lot of us that are running businesses that are just breaking things along the way. We're just trying to figure it out as we go along. How do you find that balance?
Okay, I want to answer that by just going a little bit further into the rabbit hole, because this whole situation becomes even more weird and wonderful when you recognize that Sam Bankman-Fried was actually the central crypto figure involved in the wider regulatory framework that the US government was attempting to implement. Okay, so he had a number of meetings with Gary Gensler from the SEC, so the Securities Exchange Commission, I think it's called over there. And so in their sort of delineations or their deliberations around how they should be regulating cryptocurrency, he was kind of their guy.
And he was supportive of it, wasn't it? While most of the crypto community is fighting against regulation, because that's the whole point of crypto, he was the one that was kind of fighting or kind of the spokesperson for the benefit of it.
Well, yeah, we can come back to that, because when I think most cryptocurrency enthusiasts are not against the regulation, they're against certain forms of regulation and certain forms of government overreach. But yeah, he was kind of central to this conversation. And while he was in these conversations, he was essentially accusing a number of other sort of cryptocurrency dApps and founders of engaging in the sorts of practices that he himself was engaging in, sort of accusing.
Yeah, wasn't there a public feud between him and Binance?
Yeah, I don't know how much I trust that guy either, because he's operating an offshore exchange, so I don't necessarily think that he's much more clean, although he appears to have implemented better risk management so far, I would say. But he basically was trying to make it so that no other applications in DeFi were able to gain any sort of market share or traction or regulatory approval by accusing them of many of the things he himself was engaged in. So it's just one of these really bizarre situations where, the SEC had actually investigated FTX something like 6 months ago, cleared him, and then used him sort of as their mouthpiece to then begin regulating other applications and other aspects of cryptocurrency. So there's a whole myriad of very bizarre things that happened here, and a lot of very powerful people are involved in it.
I think it would be instructive for a lot of people to read the history of the railroads in the United States, and some of the spectacular failures and the rip-offs and so on that happened in the early days of the railroads. We're seeing it now in this digital environment. So, there's nothing new under the sun. And human beings are subject to all kinds of sin. And the prospect of making a lot of money tends to cause some people to fall into all kinds of sin. And I think that's one of the reasons why we said earlier on that you need to make sure that, particularly in a new market, see, this is a new market, a regulatory framework hasn't developed, and there's argument as to whether or not it even should. There are big risks involved. So there's an upside potential and certainly if you had bought Bitcoin back in the days when you could buy a whole Bitcoin for 500 Aussie dollars, you'd be sitting pretty today, regardless of how much volatility there's been in the last couple of years. Now, the whole system is so different to what it was when Bitcoin first became available to purchase. And as an economist who knows a little bit about economic history, this is a new market using new technologies. It attracts a lot of people because it is highly speculative. It tends to attract people with a certain sort of personality type, highly charismatic people who are able to sell well and so on. And unfortunately, a lot of people go into these investments believing they're going to make a lot of money, and they listen to nobody's advice. And some do and some don't. And one of the things that happens in these early stages of the development of any new market is what I would call asymmetric information. And there's asymmetric information because people will only tell you about their successes. They won't tell you about their failures. And, from my perspective, and I'm not a real expert in this particular area, we're just seeing what always happens in the early stages of the development of a new market. And that's not to say it's a good thing, because often people who don't have a really strong ethical basis get involved, and they don't mind doing what, for many other people, their religious foundations or their simple maturity in terms of age and experience would caution them against. And I think the kind of behavior we're seeing here, we've seen it all before. And so it's not a big surprise to me. And I guess what frustrates me is that I cautioned a lot of people just about taking care and not believing anybody's story about making a huge return, because that is some people's story and some people's story only.
Yeah. Dr. I want to come back to you in a moment and talk about governance, right? But because obviously that's an area of your expertise. But I want to jump onto that point that you were just talking about the type of people that it kind of attracts right now. And I want to kind of speak into this from a psychologist point of view, or from a psychology point of view, Erin, is, I can't quite often say that, our gift is our curse almost, right? Like there's, whatever is our advantage is also a major disadvantage. Would you say that the type of person that is, I suppose, attracted to the risk and the excitement and like the pioneering of something is very similar to that? Like, is it the scammy side of it and the rug pulls and all that sort of stuff that happens, and the misbehavior and the not best practices, the not best ethical practices? Is it just two sides of the same sword?
No, I don't think I would say that. I would say that like the personality factors involved in like innovation and creativity, we can think about those on sort of the big five personality factor continuum. So, openness to experience, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, neuroticism are those five factors. Obviously, anybody who is getting into an industry and a space early is going to be pretty open to experience. They're going to be probably far more open than your average person. They're, maybe going to be more disagreeable. They're willing to go against the herd, go against, what the majority of people are doing. They may be sort of quite low on what we call trait neuroticism, which is an unfortunate word. It just means negative emotions. So they may be less sensitive to negative emotion. And so these factors are generally kind of combining in people who are early adopters or early innovators in any space. Now, in terms of people who are willing to take advantage of people, who are willing to commit crimes, who are willing to, really kind of commit sin, I think that's something that happens in all areas, in all spaces, and I think you find that's a fairly stable portion or percentage of the population. It's just that I think their effect in a new space is larger because people are less educated. People perhaps have fewer frameworks to be able to identify who they are, because, it could be, I guess, in agreement with what you're saying, that sometimes particularly in cryptocurrency, it can be difficult to tell the difference between a breakthrough disruptive technology that's going to change the world and an outright scam. It actually isn't as easy as you would think to be able to tell those two things apart early on in the piece. So the effect that, somebody who maybe has narcissistic personality disorder or they're a sociopath, their effect, I think, is just magnified in a newer space. That's the way I think about it anyway.
Okay. Then back to my comment earlier about the run fast and break stuff. Like, is that same sort of personality you were saying that is open to being an early adopter and everything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the run fast and break stuff ethic is something that has been rewarded a lot in the tech space thus far. And so, yeah, you're gonna get a lot of very similar personality types, I would say. However, this is obviously a very different type of technology because it's actually dealing with people's money. And if you break something, it's hundreds of millions of dollars, it's billions of dollars in lost capital possibly. And so I think that ethic needs a little bit of review and a little bit of consideration. And that's something that's been discussed a lot in the cryptocurrency community. So, for me personally, I tend to gravitate towards people who take their time with things. It may take them 2 or 3 years to get a project off the ground and develop it. But that wait, that patience, anybody who's able to be patient in this space, it's worth kind of looking at them.
Yeah.
I'd say.
Okay. Yeah, to Dr. Odd's point earlier is like, you know what, if you got in early, like I hear people go, oh, the market's dropped like 60%, 70%, whatever it is. It's like, yeah, but depending on when you got in, it's still up. And
up 2 million% before that, literally.
Yeah, and Tesla went down 30%. Now, depending on when you invested in it, it's either up or it's down,
Amazon dropped 95% in the .com bubble. So, I think judging things by sort of price and volatility isn't your best measure.
Yeah. Dr. Rod, what's your take for leaders on the run fast and break things concept?
Well, look, I'm risk averse. If I wasn't risk averse, I probably wouldn't be an economist. And, as a leader, I guess I don't take big risks. You do need to be aware as a leader, you're a leader because there are people following you.
Yeah.
Either because you have a formal position within an organization or because you have the kind of personal style and personal attributes that cause people to want to follow you. So I do think that even if you do exhibit these behaviors and you have this tendency, you should always bear in mind that you have people following you, and because of that, you've got some responsibility towards them.
Yeah.
I often recall John Maynard Keynes, who was perhaps one of the best-known economists who's ever lived, and his influence is still quite substantial on government policy today. He did a lot of investing. Back then, of course, there weren't as many options as we have today. And he invested a lot on behalf of his friends, and he lost a lot of it. In fact, I think he might have lost nearly all of it during the Great Depression. And he resolved to make it all back again, to make good the losses, which he actually did. It took him a long time, but he took responsibility for what had happened, even though he wasn't literally responsible for the Great Depression, of course. But he'd made certain promises to his friends that obviously turned out to be wrong. And then he spent almost the rest of his life, and he died fairly young at 64 years of age, but he almost spent the rest of his life making amends. And I think that's a good lesson for us as leaders.
Yeah, it's good. So I would have to admit that I am a run fast and break things kind of person. Kind of. I'm definitely a run fast kind of person. I don't necessarily think I like to break things as much, but I definitely am more focused on the future than I'll get back to filling out that document later, or I'll let my emails back up because I'm so charging for the future. I think for me, what's actually helped me is having people like yourselves around me, that someone like yourself, Dr. Rod, that is risk averse, someone like yourself, Erin, that keeps my head in check, that just makes sure that I can run fast and not break things and still care for those people that are around me. So I mean, there's a bit of advice for people. Avoid running fast and breaking things. How about you just try to run fast and build things?
Sounds like a great idea. Like, just, I guess, to make it applicable to like the cryptocurrency space, security has to be the number one. If you're a developer in a cryptocurrency space, like, security has to be before absolutely everything else. You need to know your contract is secure, that it can't be hacked, there are no backdoors, that it isn't an easy target for, a criminal mastermind somewhere. Because these things are, it's not like a bank vault or some other physical space where you're holding funds or you're holding wealth, where there are, physical clues of when somebody may be attempting to take down your security system. This is like a blockchain. It's online, and literally anybody in the world who is smart enough may be able to break a contract. So it's got to have like the number one priority. It's got to have that space like leaps and bounds before everything else, I would say.
That's good. Erin, obviously you've helped me, and Dr. Rod have helped me greatly through some of challenges that I've had with other leaders that are running fast and breaking things. What advice would you give to a follower, right? Someone who is serving under, or someone who is invested with someone who is just running fast and breaking stuff? How do we as good followers, as good employees, as good volunteers, whatever our position, how do we best still serve and honor someone that is just running fast and breaking things?
Well, I can see Erin's thinking.
No, I think she froze there for a moment. You're thinking
probably a good thing. It's probably a good thing.
I was thinking. Go ahead, Dr. Rod.
Look, who's going to speak first?
Go, Dr. Rod.
You go, Erin. No, okay. Look, if you're working with a leader who's always breaking things, my advice is get out.
Yeah, that's good.
It's not going to do you any good in the long run.
That's right. Nice way to say that. Yes.
But look, leaders do break things, and I think if it's not something that they do all the time, you need to forgive them and recognize that, like you, they go through life learning.
Yeah.
And as long as they learn their lesson, I think that's fine. But yeah, I just don't think you want to get involved with a leader whose whole philosophy is run fast, break things for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Because that tells me this leader has no real purpose. And you know what we're on about? Ultimately, we need to be on purpose.
Yeah, it's good. Do you have anything to add to that, Erin?
No, I think Dr. Rod pretty much said it. I would, in general, if there's a pattern there, I would generally take my investment out, take my attention out, take my employment out of that situation, because it doesn't sound like it's sustainable.
Can people like that change?
Yes, but I'd have to say, if I were to be investing anything with them, whether that's my time, attention, or funds, I would need to see evidence that they are doing that. So some sort of ability to reflect, admit a mistake, and improve. And there needs to be some sort of concrete proof of that, I would say, if there's been a pattern established that they're breaking things a lot. That's
good. So let's stay on this conversation about FTX and SBF for a little bit longer because I do want to address the governance issue, because it seems like this organization was, just a mess. The more they peel into it, the more you go, what on earth? So Dr. Rod, and obviously Erin, jump in with any information that you know a little bit more, but Dr. Rod, an organization that is all the key personnel all living together in a relationship of some form. There's organizations that they're just sharing funds between, that they're such a mess that just a simple accounting error lost $10 billion. Having all this stuff, having someone that's running fast and breaking stuff, like, what's your take from a governance perspective about something like that?
Well, there'd have to be a lack of independence, wouldn't there? So there'd be what they call in the lingo standing conflicts of interest. And ultimately, the advice to someone who has a standing conflict of interest, that is a conflict of interest that holds permanently, they probably shouldn't be involved in governance. Couple of principles of governance there. In terms of governance, there needs to be a degree of independence.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that everyone on the governing body needs to be independent.
Yeah.
To maintain independence, I would suggest that you need perhaps a majority of your governing body would need to be at least at arm's length from the management and the direct owners. Also, I think the governing body, whatever shape it takes, it needs to address two broad issues, and there are probably others as well, but two broad issues, particularly in these contexts, in the context that we're talking about here. One is you need to figure out what degree of risk you are prepared to take and what you are going to do in order to mitigate the worst possible outcomes should you take on those risks. So you need to think about risk. That's not to say you shouldn't take on risk. Every governing body takes on risk, but you need to know what you're taking on, and you need to know how you're going to mitigate the possible negative impacts of that risk. And the other thing is, and I think this is what's lacking in any new industry, this is lacking. And also in new organizations, it's always lacking. One of the roles of governance, of course, is to set down the broad parameters of policy and process. Now, as I say, that's always a difficult thing in any startup. I chair a very new charity here on the Gold Coast, and we don't have many policies because we're only very, very new, but that does make us vulnerable. And we're still working through the whole issue of what degree of risk we are prepared to take. And there are different kinds of risk as well. One of our risks, of course, is that we have a CEO, and that's about it, a CEO and a part-time admin person. If our CEO were to get sick long-term or have an accident, we're done for. Now, we haven't got a way of mitigating that risk right now, so we have to live with it. But you need to be aware of these things. It's not to say that the risks don't exist. You need to be aware of them, and you need to work up a bit of a plan in terms of what you're going to do about it. Your policies and processes should always focus on the employment and the management of the most senior people in your organization, and how you are going to keep an eye on the financial condition. There's a principle in Proverbs that says a shepherd should know the condition of his flock. And as someone who's had, been in governance boards, I guess now for over 30 years, I think for my role as a director or as a chair, I've got to know the condition of my flock.
Yeah.
And that's really, good. Really important.
That's good. And so at what stage should we be worrying about that sort of stuff? Because obviously looking at someone like, going back to, and I hate to harp on this over and over, but the run fast and break stuff, like they were just making it up as they went along. At what stage of organization should we have a board? Should we have proper governance setup?
Oh, you should do that right from the beginning. And, the board shouldn't stifle creativity.
Yeah.
The board should do all it can to develop an environment in which creativity is nurtured.
Yeah.
And so the board shouldn't really, it shouldn't be a brake on everything. And in particular, it shouldn't be a brake on the creativity that is the very heart of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So you mentioned about the creativity, and it actually draws me back to something that Erin was talking about before, about how Sam Bankman-Fried, not Sam Bankman-Friedman, how SBF for short, how there was a lot of donations to the Democratic Party. It now turns out that apparently he did a lot of dark donations, which is like under the table donation, which apparently is legal or whatever, but keeping it hidden to the Republican Party as well. Obviously, he's the spokesperson of kind of, or the representative. Obviously, he was trying to get to a point where there is some regulation, him being in the driver's seat of that regulation and their exchange being the exchange of regulation and them being the safe place, everything like that. Erin, do you feel like if that was his long-term vision, if he had have at least been able to carry it through, was there light at the end of the tunnel? Like, yes, things weren't going well now, but if he got to that point, that would have really just like made the company even more valuable, wouldn't have it?
I don't know how to answer that because it was such a bizarre situation. I'm trying to withhold judgment on what happened because, like, there are all sorts of things going through my mind, given that he was investigated already. Like, that whole organization underwent scrutiny, supposedly 6 months ago, and a lot of this was already well into play by then. Yes, he was a huge donor to, it seems like both major parties in the United States. A lot of those donations, there's kind of question marks around what they bought him, I suppose. Yeah. If I can put it that way, there's some questions there. I don't have the answers, but there's so much. I guess it seems like there were so many places where corruption could have spilt into this situation, and not just from within FTX itself. So when I go to answer that question, part of me is thinking, well, I don't see how it ever could have come to fruition given how like egregious the use of those funds were. But then that kind of begs the question of how could it have not been noticed, and how could it have been that? So that's just general thoughts.
Let's talk hypothetically then, right? Let's put FTX aside, but there is an organization that they're running fast towards trying to change a trend or be the forerunners of a particular trend as far as, let's call it, regulation, right? And being the ones that are actually advantageous of that. How do the risk versus reward kind of thing of like, how much do we sacrifice along the way to hopefully achieve that thing in the future? Like, can we sweep enough things under the rug that eventually it won't matter?
I just don't think so. And I think if you're at the point where you are committing crimes, because these are already clear crimes, like on the books, there's already regulations around use of customer funds and all of the things that were done. And I don't see how you ever really could get to a place of true value to society or the economy if this has occurred along the way. I mean, even if it hadn't have collapsed, there's probably a point just somewhere further along in the future where it would have, and possibly been an even bigger debacle. So I think if you're at a point where you're committing crimes, You absolutely cannot sweep that under the rug.
So that's our advice. Don't commit crimes, people.
Don't commit a crime.
But one of the issues I think is that they didn't define their values.
Yeah.
And again, an important point in governance is that we need to nail our mission, our mission statement. And your mission statement is made up of your vision, your purpose, your focus, and your values. And that's something that you should agree upon right at the beginning, because your values actually they kind of define the boundaries within which you will operate. And if you haven't defined your values, how can you expect people to act in any kind of constrained way?
Yeah.
Well, can I just jump in there?
Yeah, please
and
do.
say, what's really interesting about that value statement is he actually ends up doing this sort of strange interview with a publication called Vice, where the journalist and himself, SBF, were exchanging text messages. And in this text message exchange, he talks about his effective altruism stuff and also his willingness to be in the public eye around regulation, and effectively says that he did that only because it makes him look more credible, and it gives him the boost of reputation, let's call it, to be able to make the business a success. So I think the thing is, perhaps he had defined his values. They just weren't necessarily very healthy or very constructive to building something that is a good service to society.
Talking about that service, we've spent a lot longer talking about this particular topic rather than than expected, and so I was going to skip our next topic. However, I kind of want to just touch on it because we did address it earlier, and I did promise we were going to talk about it. Talking about obviously there's been a bunch of other coins and platforms and everything that have collapsed lately. And Luna was one of them, right? I won't get into it because obviously I want to kind of address it from like one key point, that everyone's talking about Ponzi scheme, right? Now, Erin, you actually mentioned that in talking about the values and everything like that, and the fact that someone only gets paid because someone else, you are that, what did you say? You're that value?
If you don't know where the yield is coming from, you are the yield.
That's it. I like that. I think that speaks across all leadership platforms, no matter where you are, right? If you don't know where the yield is coming from, you are the yield. I love that. So
I love that. If ever I write a book on investment, I'm going to quote that on the very first page.
I love it. So obviously there's all this difference between stable coins and coins, blah, 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 blah. Like there's let's not get into that. But obviously a lot of crypto stuff is either labeled a rug pull or a Ponzi scheme, right? And I don't think what I can see with SBF and what happened with FTX, that I couldn't see that was a Ponzi scheme or even a rug pull. I think that was just bad management, as and like bad business practices. No,
you could. It depends on your definition, but you could, because what was happening was that people were depositing funds onto the exchange. Those funds were then being used by Alameda to trade and earn obviously earn a return for Alameda customers. So It may not have been like a straight Ponzi, but I don't know that there was too much of a difference, because those obviously Alameda was directly attached to FTX. So in a sense,
isn't the point that people's funds were being used without their knowledge?
Yeah.
That's the
fundamentally that's the value issue that I have with it, that people's funds were being used without their knowledge.
Yeah, well,
and therefore they weren't aware of the potential risks involved.
they had a company policy that said it wouldn't be your funds wouldn't be touched. That was part of the contract, right?
Yeah.
Well,
And
there you go.
I guess a situation that was just as bad in that people believed that they were purchasing Bitcoin, but it didn't exist. So these cryptocurrencies that people were owed after the collapse, they were never there. They were just literally pretending that they had the Bitcoin, but they didn't have it. So there were things like that as well, were just completely fraudulent. So maybe Ponzi is the wrong word, but sometimes it's like the line is not that clear what separates it from a Ponzi.
Ponzi schemes then, because I do actually want to specifically talk about this because it's a word that gets thrown around in the crypto world a lot, but also I think that it's an almost overused term now. Anything that someone doesn't understand, they call it a Ponzi scheme or whatever. The Ponzi scheme is only an issue for the person at the. How do I say this? For a Ponzi scheme to work, it needs suckers, right?
Yeah.
Like if there's no one buying into it, then it doesn't grow and it doesn't.
You need a fraudulent business case, basically. So, like, I mean, I think if you think of like the scheme that gave it its name, right? So that dude, his name was Ponzi, right?
Ponzi,
and he was running this thing with stamps, I believe it was, back in 19 whatever. Sorry, I should know this more specifically. But he said that essentially he was in some way creating a return on their investment through the buying and selling of these stamps or stamp futures or something like that. But what he was doing was the stamps were never involved. He was just taking funds from the next investor and paying off the old investors.
Well, what happened was at the start, it was a real investment. So there were your mail bonds, right, which are just pretty much stamps. Like you go it's pretty much go to the post office, buy a box of stamps for $1 each, and then sell them to someone else for $1.10 each or whatever. That's pretty much what he was doing. I'm pretty sure he was in America, and he was selling them to people to invest back in the United States. And it was genuine at the start. But then because everyone was making so much money from it, there weren't enough stamps to go around. And so he was, in the end, just because everyone wanted into it, the new people that were buying in, he was taking their funds to then pay off the old investors. And that's kind of how it flowed. Yeah.
So it turned into a Ponzi. Okay, so I always thought it basically was that from the beginning, but effectively, I guess greed got the better of him or whatever, and he started breaking rules and laws, and that's when it happened. Okay.
Yeah. From a psychology point of view, how do we stop from getting caught up in a Ponzi?
I think the first thing is to be aware of your own greed. And your own propensity towards greed. Like I think it's that kind of human condition stuff, in that we have a weak spot when it comes to fast returns and lots of money, right? Like it's a very easy mechanism to be exploited in humans. So I think you've got to be aware of your own vulnerability and weakness when it comes to money, and the fact that means your judgment may be impaired when you are actually thinking about investing in something. And so I think you need to really have some safeguards in place personally with yourself, whether that's accountability with partner, friends or family, whether that's simply that you have a rule with yourself that you will pause and, not allow yourself to invest in something until you've done at least, X amount of research or X amount of time has passed. To me, it's about that kind of self-regulation stuff, the knowledge of your own greed. Aside from the fact that, there are people who want to take advantage of this stuff and who, may be willing to sell you snake oil. It's difficult for us to kind of control what other people are doing. But if we are thinking about our own propensity towards greed and the fact that we're likely to make mistakes around, getting rich, I think that's a good starting point.
That's good. Dr. Rod, as the business pastor, what advice would you give to business owners? Because, obviously, it's our responsibility as business owners to build wealth. It's our responsibility to see increase in our business. How do we, as leaders, try to, going on what Erin was talking about, trying to chase wealth, how do we find that balance between creating genuine wealth and then chasing get-rich-quick schemes?
Okay. First thing I would say is read the book of Proverbs and highlight every reference to diligence and every reference to indolence. I'm going to say something which could be quite controversial here and will upset a lot of Christians, no doubt.
Go for it.
I don't believe in passive income.
Comment below about what Dr. Rod's about to say now.
Look, in evangelical and Pentecostal circles, there's been this idea that we need to build up passive income. I actually don't see that in the Bible. Deuteronomy 8:18 lays out the principle, I have given your arm strength to get wealth. And then all through Proverbs, we talk about the reward comes to the diligent. So if you want to build wealth, I think you need to commit yourself to diligence. That is, to work hard with the gifts and the talents and the resources that God has given you.
Really
and
good.
At the same time, of course, as you're reading through Proverbs, bear in mind the parable of the talents. Okay, because I think that has application here as well. Now, back in the old days when I first heard about passive income in church circles, it was all about making it possible for you to sit back with your feet up and watch the money roll in. I actually don't think that's a biblical principle at all.
God created us to work.
This is not to say you should never own shares or never get involved in cryptocurrencies, etc. I believe prophetically that these markets are one means by which the wealth of the wicked or the sinner has been stored up for the use of the righteous. I actually like what it says in the amplified version of the Bible, and I've actually written it down, so let me read it.
Go for it.
This is Proverbs 13:22, and I've actually preached on this not all that long ago. This is from the Amplified Bible, not the Amplified Classical Edition, as it's now called, but the more recent version. A good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. That's the first half of this verse. The second half is, and the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the hands of the righteous. Now, the hands of is not in the original. That's been added by the translators of the Amplified Bible. But whenever hands are referred to in the Old Testament in particular, but there are a couple of references in the New Testament, it's always to work. We build wealth through work. Now, that work is not necessarily physical work. That work is research as well. So if you're involved in investment in digital assets, you're not going to be literally digging with your hands or anything like that. You'll be working by doing a lot of research. Most of it will be online, but also seek input of others who perhaps have operated in this area. Go talk to a Christian financial planner. Go and talk to someone like Erin, who knows about this and has had some experience. That's what I mean by diligence or by hard work in this area. The idea that any income should be passive, I actually think is contrary to the principle set out in the Word of God. Now, I have an asset portfolio. I work with a financial planner. I pay that financial planner, and I'm happy to do so because I'm absolutely certain that through his diligence and me taking his advice, my portfolio is at least $300,000 or $400,000 bigger than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by being diligent and engaging in work. It's not always physical work, but it's, applying the gift that God has given you between the ears and by listening to other people before you make a choice. So I'm not against investment in real estate, in digital assets, in shares, and I am involved, of course, in in stocks and shares myself, but with advice, and I pay for that advice, and I'm happy to do so. And also I earn income, and you can leverage that income often through wise investments.
Yeah.
And to people in business, there are two things you should do with your income. One is live well, live generously on it. So take a leaf out of Wesley's book. Wesley said, in terms of money, gain all you can, save all you can after being generous to your household and yourself, then give all you can. I think they're great principles. You gain all you can through diligent work. Mm-hmm. You save all you can through being generous with your own sort of inner circle, and then you give away the rest, basically.
Yeah.
That's why God has given you the power or the strength to get wealth. So if you're in business, look at the income stream. One, to provide a means of generous living for yourself, your household, support your church, and so on and so forth, and tithe out of that. I would always recommend that you tithe, or in fact go beyond the tithe, but that's a topic for another day. But also use that income. You can leverage a real estate portfolio, a share portfolio, a portfolio that include digital assets and so on, so that if your business actually falls upon hard times at some point in the future, you don't also fall upon hard times.
That's good. So to avoid a Ponzi scheme, or avoid being a Ponzi scheme, really, like, let's not chase after quick, get rich quick schemes. The Bible speaks against that. Because, I mean, look, it always falls apart in the end, as we see. Crypto is a great, not going to say whether it's good or bad investment. If you look over time, it's a better investment than if you're looking at it in a short term. If you're just trying to get in there to make a quick buck, it's not going to work for you. No investment is going to work for you. And as Dr. Rod said, be diligent. Be diligent with your work, with the skills and gifts that God has given you, and add value to your community, add value to other people, solve problems for people, so you can build wealth as well, because that's how God has called you to build wealth. And hey, if you can look around you, and Erin, give us that quote again.
If you don't know where the yield is coming from, you are the yield.
Remember that. Let's get on to the next topic, where we talk about NFTs. Now, obviously in 2021, they exploded. 2022, meh. Now at the end, I think in September, I saw this stat. In September, so OpenSea was one of the main trading platforms for NFT, and in September, it was down nearly 99% from when it had been trading on May 1st. So it was this big hype. Obviously, some people have made lots of money from it. Some people have now lost a lot of money from it. And now it seems to be, well, my question really, actually, to both of you, but I'm going to ask this to Erin, directed to Erin first, because not only is Erin a psychologist, not only is she really up on this digital stuff, she's also a creative. She's also an artist. She is a recording musician, and who I go to for my creative advice. So whenever we talk about creative things, she's the person that I'm talking to. Erin, NFTs, are they all hype, or were we just too early?
It's an amazing question. I have to say it's both. And here's my reasoning. Why was it hype? Part of the reason why it was hype was because what they actually sold themselves to be, or what the narrative of NFTs were, was not in fact what they were.
Yep.
Sorry, someone ringing my doorbell. Can you guys hear?
It's okay.
It's going to get louder as well.
We all have visitors.
So basically, NFTs, a lot of them were these digital artworks that were secured on the blockchain, we'll put it that way. So you may have had a digital file of some description. It may have been audio or visual. And then there was a corresponding blockchain transaction that would prove your ownership of this digital artwork, right? And so it was supposed to have similar value to like the collectible space, whether that was rare art or coins or Pokemon cards or whatever. It was supposed to be the digital version of that. Now, one of the main problems I saw early on was that there was no actual connection between the digital file and this blockchain transaction, right? So, there was all this like hullabaloo around, it's an immutable transaction. It's on the blockchain. No one can ever take this ownership from you. You can prove your ownership. But the problem was that a lot of these digital files were stored on these centralized servers. So if one of these servers went down, then your JPEG file or your MP3 file is just gone, right? And so there wasn't really a there, like particularly early on, like the blockchain thing, it's almost like it was just sort of duct taped onto it to kind of create a hype narrative.
Yeah.
And so that was a big part of the reason why I saw it as a lot of hype.
Is that because it wasn't actually that, or it could have been, but because everyone was trying to rush to market, they weren't doing it properly?
No, there just wasn't a way to do it because the storage of some of these files, like the blockchain actually can't handle it. Like blockchains are really quite, like if you think about what they are, they're very slow databases effectively, right? And they're really useful for very specific circumstances, and that's when you're trying to prove transactions in a public way that other people can verify. And it solves something called the double spend problem, which has sort of been a problem that has faced the sort of cryptographic space for a very long time. Anyway, that's sort of beside the point. But it's very difficult to store any large file on the blockchain, like on Ethereum, it would just cost way too much money. There are blockchains now that it could become possible in the future. They may already exist, but certainly the Ethereum craze was like it was just a bit like, what's going on here? Why is there such a dislocation between what's being said and what's actually happening? And then, people lost NFTs because servers went down, and so they've spent all this money and then they can't even access the file anymore. And so there was a lot of...
There was someone that had created a movie or a TV series with their Bored Ape or something, or one of those or whatever, and they lost it somehow. Someone stole it or something. And now, even though they have the receipt of them, that's what I don't understand about it, because they bought it, they've got the receipt of it, but something happened that they don't actually have the token or something like that, that now the IP doesn't belong. They can't run this TV show or this movie because they actually don't own the rights to it because they don't have it in their possession.
This is the other big point around it is there, when you purchase an NFT, you don't purchase the intellectual property. You're basically just purchasing a blockchain transaction, right? So as a purchaser, you have far fewer rights than somebody who perhaps goes and purchases the rights to a certain song or a certain artwork or a certain video file that you want to then use in some other creative exploit or as part of your marketing or whatever. You can't do that with an NFT because you haven't purchased the intellectual property. It stays with the artist. So all you have is the blockchain transaction, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So there's sort of a logical error going on in what they are. But so there's some of the negatives on the other side of things. I think if some of these problems can be solved, I do see them as being very liberating for artists. I do think there's going to be a lot of social capital involved with being able to display these NFTs on social media and this and that. And I think it'll be a new means for artists to create an income and create relationships with their fans. But there's certain sort of technological limitations that I think mean that both we are too early and it was all hype.
What do you think we could learn as leaders from this situation with NFTs that have just gone? I suppose for me, it comes down to talking about how do we avoid chasing fads? Because there was a lot of businesses that kind of shifted to this NFT thing because like it was the thing. Now it's down 99% in a matter of 5 months or whatever that is, a rough calculation. How do we stay up with the trends without avoiding being caught up in the hype?
To me, I think a lot of it actually comes back to what Dr. Rod was talking about earlier when it comes to risk management. I think if you're entering a new space, you have to be aware that it will be somewhat, like I was saying earlier, it will be somewhat difficult to discern between what's something that's valuable, what's something that's like a disruptive technology, what's a scam, what's a fad. We may not know entirely in the very beginning. And so I think it's about recognizing that anything that you invest in an emerging space very early on is money that you can very easily lose in an instant. It's also about recognizing that a space like that's going to be incredibly volatile. So a lot of this sort of diligence that I think Dr. Rod was talking about earlier is also around your own self-regulation and understanding that a lot of these market cycles are going to be driven by fear or greed. And if you fall captive to either of those emotions, you're unlikely to actually do well. So I think it's about recognizing the risks, understanding that you're going to need to be very patient early on, understanding that there's going to be a lot of volatility, which is going to mean that you're going to be experiencing a lot of fear and greed, and really understanding that this is a long-term, it's almost as if it's a long-term gamble. I don't want to use that word that it's gambling, but there are some aspects of this where you want to involve yourself, but you also want to understand that it could go away tomorrow.
Yeah, that's good. Dr. Rod, what's your take on this NFT space? Do you own NFTs, Dr. Rod?
No, I didn't, because I didn't know anything about them until I did some research for this particular video. So I'm sitting here learning a lot from Erin. But look, the principles that she's espoused, I agree with 100%. And look, it's no different to any other emerging market. And look, people have lost their shirts on gold stocks on the share market. On so many other things, projects, housing markets. Look, the point is this: if what's in your heart is to make a substantial monetary gain for little or no effort, then you shouldn't have anything to do with it, because it's unbiblical, right? Yeah. Then if you're looking to make a substantial gain over a short period of time, that's either gambling or highly speculative. If you're looking at, say, and this is an important principle in investment, if you're looking at dribbling funds in slowly over a long period of time, regardless of where the cycle happens to be, then I think you are a genuine investor. You talk to financial analysts, financial planners, and they'll give you this advice. It doesn't make any difference what the market is. Real estate's a little bit different because it is so lumpy, and you're going to be investing perhaps $500,000 at a time. In the larger cities, it'd be 2 or 3 times that. But say in the stock market, in futures market, in digital markets of various kinds, a genuine investor basically dribbles funds into these markets over a long period of time, regardless of the cycle. And that's something that I think is general advice that people should take pretty seriously.
So, Erin, what should we, from a creative standpoint, what should we be looking out for in the NFT space? What do you predict? No, I'm trying to avoid the word predict, because I don't like, not to predict. What would you wish could happen? I'm sure there's some leaders that are creatives, that are singers, that are artists, that are like whatever, musicians, or you're some form of a creative. What could they look out for in the NFT space?
Yeah, like it's a tough one, because like I said, there's this like technological issue as it stands. I think that there will be different use cases, and they're already emerging, and NFTs aren't just used by creatives as well. So we have NFTs, so non-fungible tokens, being used to implement particular smart contracts for certain use cases like buying properties internationally. And there are certain ways that they can be used within other regulatory and legal frameworks, and they actually are an innovation in those cases. For a creative, I think that NFTs might be more about access and building communities, and being able to, find different ways to monetize or organize or structure online programs, or something that I'm beginning to see that is quite interesting is using NFTs as tickets.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get to an event, you scan your NFT, and then that unlocks certain perks and certain rewards for the fan. So there's things like that where I think there's going to be other use cases. I think it's going to help with branding and marketing, and perhaps incentivizing your community to engage with you in new ways. So I can see it being like helpful in those situations, again, sort of facilitating you to be able to do some work, to provide some value, and just do it in a new way and organize it in a new way.
Yeah, it's really good. I was going to actually jump on that because I was going to say, Erin, it sounds like you're just talking about finding different ways to provide value for people, and I think that's the key of it. It like kind of sums up our, the whole crypto conversation is about creating value for people. It's about are we investing in something to create value or just to get rich quick? Are we producing something because we want to add value, or are we just trying to get rich? So NFTs, all hype, too early. I suspect both, as Erin said. I suspect it's a little bit of both. There was a lot of hype around it, but I suspect that it, like all these things, I think that they need to kind of get this grand exposure at the start to be able to get some momentum around them. And then who knows where they're going to end up. Because people have invested so much into it already, people have to make it work. So we'll be seeing more of it, but who knows? Like Erin said, people are using NFTs to buy property as a way to sign contracts or whatever, to approve contracts. So who knows where that's going to go. Talking about all hype and seeing where things go, the metaverse. Our last topic for the metaverse. Mark Zuckerberg, specifically, like obviously all this hype around NFTs and cryptocurrency, it was all kind of leading towards there being this online world where all this money and all these NFTs actually were able to be utilized properly. And obviously Facebook made the transition from Facebook to Meta as a company, and then separated their name from the platform, because Mark Zuckerberg was obviously making a big play towards the metaverse. Obviously he's seeing that he's losing usership and losing value on Facebook, and made a massive, massive play. He lost $100 billion. He didn't lose that money, but he's lost that in net worth, that he's now $100 billion less. Like how crazy is that? That you have an amount that you're worth, and then now you're $100 billion worth less. Imagine waking up with that. But my question to both of you, I don't know who wants to jump in first. Is this move a desperate move? Is this like someone clutching at straws because their empire is kind of disappearing, Facebook? Or is he just a visionary and he's just ahead of his time?
We're not rushing, are we? Well, look, as far as Facebook itself is concerned, it morphed, of course, from being a genuine social platform to a making money platform. Now, it's the first phase of making money was to provide ways for us to make money.
Yeah.
I think now the way Facebook operates, it's there only to make money for shareholders.
Yeah.
And so I don't look at my Facebook account very often at all anymore, maybe once or twice a week. And I suspect that's what's happening with a lot of people, because it's not really a good social platform anymore. And so I think Facebook itself, because it's become so focused now on making money for shareholders, it's become a bit of a nuisance in my life, quite frankly. So I just don't use it, and a lot of people I know hardly use it at all anymore. So I think that's one issue. The whole thing about the metaverse, I'm not convinced that it's gone beyond a marketing play at this point, but I think the technology is going to be developed. And I don't even pretend to know what he really means by metaverse. I guess, you can go out into cyberspace and encounter bits and pieces of the metaverse. I guess that's how it works. So the whole thing hasn't been
That is a perfect explanation, Dr.
clearly
Rod.
demonstrated. Well, you can't
We don't need
actually
to talk
go out
anymore.
into cyberspace. You do it sitting in your chair. But look, I just keep coming back to the fact that this isn't all that different to any other innovation throughout human history.
Yeah.
And it attracts what you might call the cowboys or the Ponzi artists at the beginning, as well as people who are very well-intentioned and make mistakes. There are others who are well-intentioned and they do well. So if we sort of ran to regulation and said we've got to stop this because it's full of cowboys, people are being ripped off, then I think ultimately that would diminish us. And I'm not even saying we've got to live through this. Fundamentally, these things happen because of the fallen nature of humanity. And I hate to keep going back, to this Christian theme, but I'm the business pastor. I can't help it. So, we're going to find evidence of the fallenness of humanity absolutely everywhere, including in this metaverse. I don't think that is necessarily a reason for us to want to shut it down.
Yeah.
But to develop it redemptively. And I think that should be our heart, Craig. And as Christians, rather than put a lid on it and stop it, let's say, okay, like so many other innovations throughout human history, let us take this as evidence of God's I don't call it general grace. It's oh dear me, I've forgotten. It's on the tip of my tongue, but it's a general grace, which is evidence of God's desire to bless the whole of humanity. Yeah, because He loves us all. Now, in the hands of frail, imperfect, sinful human beings, it won't always go right. But I don't think we as Christians should write it off. Yeah, those of us who have the capacity to do so should be in there as agents of redemption. And we should be looking at ways of developing this whole area in such a way as to contribute positively to human flourishing. That's my take on it, but as you know, that's my take on just about everything.
Well, with Erin, obviously talking about Facebook was his money. It was his money cow, right? That's how he was making money. Then with all these restrictions from Apple, they lost all their ability to track people. I know. I coach people on how to use all marketing strategies, Facebook being one of them. And now we actually advise away from it in most cases because you used to be able to target. The advantage of Facebook is I could target a specific person, and I knew not them specifically, but a specific type of person in a specific demographic. But since all these privacy laws came in and every Apple user decided to not share information on the app and everything like that, like all of that, they lost the ability, and me as well as when they became woke, they also then stopped targeting of certain things, which then made it very difficult to target someone at all. And now it's just almost generalized like a newspaper or television or radio or something like that. So obviously, because they lost that power of being able to target people, they knew that it was because of Apple, because they are just simply at the whim of whatever device they're on. Mark Zuckerberg tried to make this shift to going, let me own the device, because he knows he can't make a phone. They've tried, it failed. But let me make the device, which is the metaverse. Let us create that, and then we're in control of that. And we can't, then our income is no longer at the risk of someone else. What's your take on that approach? And do you think that it was the right play, too early, too expensive? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of big questions there, hey, and I think the fact that these privacy laws came into effect really, to me, is just evidence that the tide was turning on people's willingness to be tracked and targeted in that way, and those laws really just kind of reflect that. So I think it was already falling out of favor. And I think to Dr. Rod's point, I think when Zuckerberg went from kind of creating the best product he could that actually did connect people, and it moved more towards, well, how much advertising revenue and therefore shareholder value can we create? When it became just predominantly about that, I think that's when the wheels started to fall off. And in much the same way as our friend Mr. Ponzi perhaps started with some good intentions, he fell victim to greed, and we can see obviously that's had a huge effect on him. So to me, I guess the question really is just about, okay, so, Mark Zuckerberg's possibly the tides of public perception have perhaps turned on that business model. Can he reinvent himself and reinvent his technology in a way that does some good for the world, is actually disruptive, and actually brings new real value? Can he do it a second time? I think it's kind of almost like a reset for him now. Obviously, he's got many more resources and network behind him now than when he first started Facebook.
It's not on a college dorm floor, room floor at the moment.
He also probably has a few more barriers in terms of the way that people view him. I think there's a lot of, not necessarily a lot of fond feelings towards him in various different communities and sectors. So to me, it's really, can he actually reinvent himself and his business again in a way that's actually sustainable and provides good value for the world? And it's a big ask to do it twice. So we'll see.
Yeah, is it that old story of a celebrity like trying to hold on to their celebrity just a little bit too long? I think actually it's funny you both mentioned that it was the shareholders and the need to please the shareholders, which is the driver. I kind of disagree with it just a little bit. And here's how I disagree. Marketers ruin everything. I'm at fault. I teach marketing. I get my clients to do marketing. I understand marketing. I've been a marketer for years, and at the early stages, you see a great opportunity. Facebook was cheap to advertise and easy. It was so easy for every person to do it, and it was just easy to target the right people, and it worked. And then because it worked, then everyone did it, and then so many Facebook ad agencies popped up over everywhere. And they just ruined it because people got sick of it, right? Because then people understood, oh, now that's how much I'm being tracked. You open up Facebook and you're like, hang on, I just visited that website. How do they know? Well, because everyone's tracking you, right? And I just believe that marketers ruin everything. And there was a great thing in Facebook and marketers ruined it. Now, obviously it was their play. That was their long-term vision of making money from it. But how do we then, let's turn this back onto, because none of us would be, I don't wish this upon you. Let me say, I hope that you get to a point where you have $100 billion worth that you could theoretically lose, but I pray that you don't. But none of us currently have $100 billion to lose. What can we learn about this as leaders? There's obviously some pivots. There's the appearance, like the appearance in his public appearance, I suppose, and the organization, and then the shift now to this new thing and being a visionary. He was a visionary once. Can he be a visionary twice? Is he too early? Will he just burn up money? Like all this. What can we learn as business owners that are caught in a business that is starting to struggle because tides have changed, public perception has changed? How do we make a pivot at the right time to the right thing?
I wish I knew because I'd jump in with the answer. Look, I honestly, the only tiny bit of wisdom I have to offer here is look to the long term. Make your decisions right from the start with the sustainability of the business in mind into the long term. So don't allow your thinking to be clouded by opportunities to make a lot of money over the short term without thinking really, really carefully about what this might mean in the long term.
Yeah, that's good. Erin?
Yeah, I'd certainly echo that. I think long-term sustainability has to be the guiding principle. And I don't know what the thing is. I don't know what it is that allows people to reinvent themselves. Like you see it with something like the music industry, which is like the vast majority of people, it's like they might come out with one song or one album and then you never see them again. But there's a handful of people who just seem to be able to reinvent themselves. There's an instinct or there's an intuition. There's just a creative spark of some description that allows them to do that. And whether they're just able to kind of read the signs of the times better, whether they're just more passionate, whether there's just a stronger desire to express themselves. I don't know exactly what the differentiation is. Maybe it's just talent. But for whatever reason, some people are just able to do that, and the test is time. We'll see with Mark over time, I think, if that's the case for him.
That's good.
And look, I think also, as Christians, don't be too upset if you make a mistake.
That's good.
We'd like to think that we've got the wisdom of the Holy Spirit and we listen to God and that we never put a foot wrong. I have known far too many Christian entrepreneurs who have become bankrupt. And I don't see that that's a result of sin or lack of wisdom. But, the very word entrepreneur literally means risk taker.
Yeah, that's good.
A good entrepreneur employs prudence to try to assess the potential outcomes of any risk that they take. They are taking a risk. And I've known so many who at one time or other in their experience as entrepreneurs, they've lost a lot of money. I've known some who have lost a literal fortune, multiple hundreds of millions of dollars. This was during the global financial crisis. Another who was actually involved in a finance business, and they actually needed to be financed themselves. And in the global financial crisis, they had a deal ready to go. It all fell through when now they didn't cause the global financial crisis. That wasn't caused by their sin or their lack of wisdom. they were just participating in a fallen world
Mm.
like all of us do. So, we're not always going to get it right. That's actually okay.
Yeah.
As long as we have stuck to our values, our biblically based values, it's okay. And what you do is you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you start yourself over again. Most entrepreneurs are what I call serial entrepreneurs.
Mm.
They get into one thing after another. Some succeed and some don't. If you don't succeed, that is actually quite okay.
Yeah, I think that's good. Because, going back to a couple of things we kind of alluded to today, but work is worship, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, yes, we need to be diligent in that work, but if it's not successful, that's okay, as you're saying, Dr. Rod. It's how do we handle ourselves? How do we carry ourselves throughout that? Because we can still influence people with that. I think going on to what can we learn from this Mark Zuckerberg situation is, yes, be looking long term like he is. He's looking really long term. And who knows how good it's. Hopefully he's done the budget and know that he's got the finances to be able to carry himself through that. But look, we need to be constantly looking towards a future in our organization, in our industry, making sure we're just make sure we're well informed in our industry. I think one of the biggest challenges I see when coaching businesses or with some businesses I've been involved in, they've found a way that works and they've just stuck with it. And yes, that's good. But the problem is, as soon as things change, they're not ready because they've just been doing the same thing over and over again. They've been using the same old strategies. It's worked for them, but they've gotten comfortable. There's this saying, the enemy of great is not bad. The enemy of great is good, right? So sometimes if you're doing good, we can get comfortable and not push ourselves to innovate and change and look at new ways of doing things. We kind of get stuck in a rut and stuck in old ways of doing things. And this is across our ministry, this is across business, this is across all areas of our life. We can just get caught up in doing things the old way. And so my encouragement to you is constantly be looking at ways you can evolve. So let's end with the Bible, looking at Luke, leadership lessons from Luke. Now, I went through Luke and I couldn't find any stories on crypto. I just couldn't find it. However, there was something that jumped out at me. There was no metaverse, I'll tell you. There was a passage in Luke 6 from 37 to 42. And it's titled Judging Others. And I thought that it was really appropriate to what we were talking about today, because obviously we've spoken today about a lot of failures in the crypto world, right? In the NFT space, in the metaverse. We've spoken about failures and there can be a tendency to judge people. Like we said, we don't know all of the stories. We don't know. We're only drawing from what we know and how we can learn to be better leaders. We're not judging these people at all. Who knows what they're going through? Who knows what the real story is? And so I just thought it would be really appropriate for us to end reading this passage, because I actually feel like there's a few different messages in here for us. But first of all, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For the measure you use, it will be measured against you. For the measure you use will be measured against you. we speak about, judging all these people. Don't judge, because we all make mistakes. We're going to get caught up in it. But I also like for the measure you use will be measured out for you. Are we just trying to create some scheme to make a quick buck from the people that we're providing a service to? Or are we actually providing value to them? I know that my clients know that I'm there for them way beyond the payment that they give me. They know that I don't limit my time with them. They know that I'm there for them. I'm living and breathing their businesses almost as much as they are. And because I'm generous with my time, they're always also generous back to me as their coach. He also told them this parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? I kind of thought this was kind of important because we spoke about crypto. We spoke about, going and investing in something that you don't actually know what you're investing in. Well, let's make sure we know what we're investing in. Otherwise, it's just literally the blind leading the blind. And Jesus spoke against that. But otherwise, you'll both fall into a pit. Well, if you went and blindly invested money in crypto, that's on you. A student is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. I kind of feel like that speaks to the Mark Zuckerberg thing, that he was the kind of the student that became the teacher, and now he's trying to become a student again, but who knows, maybe the next platform or whatever will end up taking over him. I feel like we can't get stuck in this mode of thinking that we're at the top. We're the teacher. We're the all knowledgeable one. We can't get stuck in that spot because the world is changing and we need to continue to learn. And then it ends with this. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? How can you say to your brother, "Brother, let me take the speck out of your eye," when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take out the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. As we have touted a number of times before on this show, we're not here to judge those people. We are trying to learn from these things of how we can be better. And I hope that you have been able to learn across, the last almost 2 hours now. It's been a long one. I hope you've been able to learn over that time of how looking at yourself, you can self-reflect of what you can learn from these situations rather than judging others. Let me open up. Dr. Rod, Erin, do you have any comments?
No, I think I'm pretty well exhausted on this. I agree with you. It is pretty hard to find any references anywhere in the Bible that you can apply directly to the context that we're talking about. But, the book of Luke and much of the rest of the Bible focuses on how we are to behave regardless of our context or situation. And I think as Christians, we just need to have an awareness that God has expectations of us in terms of how we relate to others and how we behave regardless of the context.
That's good. Erin?
I love it. I think you guys have said it all. I think they're wonderful principles to be living by. And, I think a lot of what you've been speaking about, I'll be implementing a lot more for myself in the coming weeks as well. So, I don't think you can go wrong when you're following a Bible passage.
Let me speak specifically to the psychologist in you then. This whole concept of speck of sawdust in someone else's and log in our own eye. Why is it so easy for us to judge other people? Actually, going back to the Sam Bankman-Fried thing that you said, like he was judging all the other platforms for doing the very thing he was doing. Now, whether he did that intentionally or ignorantly, why is it that we are so blind to our own things and so easier to see faults in others?
It's a good question. I mean, one of the mechanisms is probably about how our egos function. So if you take, classic psychological theory, we have three parts to how our minds work. We have an unconscious, so, an area of our minds that we're actually not totally aware of, where there's a lot of stuff that's sort of stored. We have something that's called an ego, and that ego is designed really to kind of protect us and also to kind of mediate between us and the outside world. And then we have something that's called a superego, which is all about sort of social constraints and laws and society at large, and that aspect. And given that we are, fallen human beings, it tends to be easy for us to deceive ourselves, to have really quite large blind spots in this unconscious part of our mind. And it's also, I think there's also just a propensity within human beings to just choose the easy way out. And often it's just easier, like emotionally, to blame someone else rather than to fully reflect and take on the responsibility for our actions and all of the emotions and all of the weight that comes with that. And so I think that that's a big part of it.
What happens in, the one thing that let me just talk about me. Let me talk about my father. I love my father. But when we get around family dinners, it really frustrates me because he just tells these long-winded, useless, pointless stories that were kind of nothing to do with what we're talking about. Love you, Dad. Okay. And one day I had this revelation that, because it just irks me inside whenever he starts going on a rant. I'm like, and then I realized I was at an event with some friends and I'm like, I do the same thing. Why is it that the thing that we actually don't like in ourselves is and I would kind of justify that I'm always on point, even though it may be a little long-winded or whatever, like whatever. But I know that secretly I got frustrated with my dad, or subconsciously I got frustrated with my dad because it was something I don't like about in myself that I wasn't even aware of. How can we be more aware of those things, or how does that play out?
There's a lot there. It's probably a very long answer to learn how to develop the skill of self-reflection. But I think a lot of it starts with intention, the intention to be honest with ourselves and to be open to receiving feedback. And then it's about trusting relationships and having individuals in our life that we're able to go to and ask them for truthful feedback about ourselves. So our own intentions are a lot of it, and our relationship with others as well. I think is really important.
That's awesome. Hey, great. Well, thank you for sharing, Erin. Thank you for jumping on and joining us today. Thank you for watching and being a part of this. If any of this has spoken to you and encouraged you or challenged you personally in your leadership, or maybe shifted your perspective somehow, we'd love to hear your comment below. And hey, if you've enjoyed it or it's added any value to you learning a little bit about crypto and the metaverse and NFTs and how we can learn to be better leaders, give us a thumbs up. And hey, if you like this content and want to watch more, check out our channel and consider subscribing. We would really appreciate you becoming part of our family here. Look, once again, Dr. Rod St. Hill, thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. And it's so good to work with you, Erin.
It was wonderful. It was actually such a great chat. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
We do need to do it again, actually, Craig. So you've got to organise another excuse for us to get together.
We will definitely be doing this again. So thank you, Erin. I really appreciate everything you do for me personally, for us, the organisation, and what you've shared here as well. So thank you. Love to you both, seriously. And guys, go and give them some love in the comments as well. And hey, If you do want to see more of Erin as well, put some comments below and make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you can see when she comes on next. See you next time.